In this video, we will configure OSPF routing on our FortiGate firewall with our Cisco LAN environment. But before we do that, here is the network diagram we will reference with our configuration. So this is similar to our other main diagram, but it is more focused with OSPF. So OSPF, like RIP and EIGRP, it is a dynamic routing protocol. With static routes, you have to manually specify how to reach a specific network, like what we did for a static route, or reaching our administrative network, for example. So using static routes are great for smaller environments, but if your environment consists of several layer 3 devices, like routers or layer 3 switches, then using a dynamic routing protocol is definitely recommended. This allows your layer 3 devices to automatically exchange routing information on how to reach a particular network that is attached to it. So everything is done dynamically, and this is what we want to set up. So with OSPF, there are several concepts, which I won't get into for this video, but for OSPF, it involves creating zones or areas, which defines a set of networks. For the area, it can be a standard area, a backbone area, or maybe a stub area. So every OSPF network must have a backbone area, and all other areas like standard areas connect into the backbone area. And that is reflected here in this diagram. For the network that is connected between the firewall and the core switch, what we have called our transit network, that will exist in area 0, which is the backbone area that is required. Then every other area would connect to the OSPF backbone. So the firewall would not have any specific networks attached that will exist in a standard area. However, our core switch, we will have 2 networks that will exist in different areas. One area for our user network and another area for our server network. So the OSPF diagram will show all of these areas and the networks that we will be configuring in this particular video. Here's how our user network is configured, which exists in VLAN 101. And remember, our user computer is connected to this network. And here is how our server network is configured, which exists in VLAN 201. Okay, so let's begin our OSPF configuration starting on our core switch. And to do that, we're going to first get into our configuration mode. And we're going to enable the OSPF routing process and define a process ID, which is like an identifier of 1. Next, we're going to define our user network, followed by the wildcard mask for a class C. And this network will exist in area 101. Next, we're going to define our server network, which is the 201 network. Next, we're going to define the wildcard mask for a class C network, and this will exist in area 201. Then we're going to define the transit network that exists between our FortiGate and our core switch. So if you remember that was network 172.17.99.16, and we're going to include the wildcard mask for a /30 network, which is .3. And this will exist in the OSPF backbone area, which is area 0. And that is it. So let's go ahead and exit out, and let's save our changes. Now let's begin the OSPF configuration on our firewall. So let's go ahead and log in first. Okay, so first we need to enable the advanced routing feature that will allow support to configure dynamic routing protocols like OSPF and BGP. So let's go to the feature page, which is here under config. And let's enable advanced routing here at the top. And let's apply our changes. Okay, so doing that, that will create a new section called router that you see over here on the left. And all of the routing functions are moved there, which includes the static routes that we configured earlier. Now, doing this change, it will not bring everything down or remove what we already configured. It simply just reorganize how it is configured on the administrative page. To configure OSPF, let's actually first close up our static route details. Let's go to dynamic and let's go to OSPF. Okay, so here at the very first line, we need to define the router ID that will be used for building a neighbor relationship with our core switch, which is already configured for OSPF. So here we will enter or define the IP address of the LAN facing interface of our firewall, which is .17.99.17. Okay, next we need to define the OSPF areas that will be used on the firewall. So in our case, we will create a single OSPF area, which would be our OSPF backbone area. Okay, so for the area, it has to be written as an IP address, where on our Cisco core switch, we can simply define a numeric value for the area ID. So for area 0, we will enter 0.0.0.0. So this is the same as area 0. That's also reflected in the Show network diagram that we included here. Just wanted you to see that for reference there. Okay, and the type here will be left as standard, but it can also be an NSSA or a stub area if needed. And we can also enable authentication. We have that option, but we will leave it disabled for now. When we are done, we'll go ahead and we will add area 0. Next, we need to define all of the networks that we want to be included and advertised using OSPF. In our case, we only need to add the transit network from the LAN facing interface down to the core. So let's create that by going to create new under networks. And here we will list the network that will exist in area 0, matching what we configured on the core switch. So let's go ahead and add this network. Great, and we'll say, okay. Once we're done, let's go ahead and apply our changes. So now OSPF has been configured on our FortiGate. So now let's go ahead and view the routing table on our FortiGate to see what is received. And here we see that our firewall has dynamically learned about 2 OSPF routes, one for the user network and the other for the server network. And both of these networks have a next hop that is our core switch. This means that our users, our servers, and our firewall can now all communicate together. Let's go back to our core switch that we configured initially for OSPF to see how that is configured. So there, right there on the console right here, you will see that a new neighbor has been established to our firewall and it has entered into a full state. This means that all routes advertised has been received and injected into the routing table. We can confirm the neighbor relationship by typing in the command show IP OSPF neighbor. Okay, and there you will see our firewall is listed as a neighbor and that the router ID is what we specified in our configuration on the FortiGate. So when we view the routing table on our core switch, you will see that we are not receiving any routes from the firewall. Why is that? Well, it's pretty simple. So the FortiGate wasn't configured with any additional networks that need to be advertised down to us. The transit network already exists on our core switch and it is treated as a connected route. So us not receiving anything is normal. But what we want to do is that we need the ability to access the internet. So right now, our user and our server networks will not be able to access the internet until we add a default route. But we want to do that dynamically using OSPF. So to do that, let's go back to our firewall. We'll move this aside. Let's go back to our OSPF configuration. And here at the top, we're going to extend this section that's called Advanced Options. And here for default information, we will set this to always. And next, we will select static routes that we want to be redistributed or injected into our OSPF routing domain. Remember, the default route we added earlier to our firewall was a static route. Well, we want that network and that static route to be used in our environment. So we want that to be redistributed within OSPF and be received on our core switch. So once we are done with our changes, let's go ahead and apply them. When we go back to our core switch, and let's look at our routing table again, we'll now see a default route that is learned by OSPF pointing to our firewall right here. The symbol OE2 right here on the left, this means that this OSPF route was learned from another routing protocol that was injected into our OSPF domain. Well, that other routing protocol was static routes. To be more exact, it was our default static route. So this is how you can configure OSPF routing on the FortiGate and connecting it to a Cisco Layer 3 device like this Layer 3 core switch for dynamically exchanging routes.